Kayla Bergeron, a Port Authority public affairs chief, caught in her office on the 68th floor.
Working at the Port Authority was the best job in my life. Every morning, I'd get off at the Fulton Street subway stop, and then I would get my venti mocha, and then I would stride onto the plaza of the World Trade Center. Even sometimes I would sit on the water fountain. We'd just sit and relax and stare. There were concerts on the plaza. What I liked about the World Trade Center is that it was like nothing else. It was hustle and bustle. It was like a world unto its own. From my office on the 68th floor, I had a view of the Statue of Liberty, which was just magnificent. In June of 2001, a new executive director, Neil Levin, came to the Port Authority. Previously, he had been the superintendent of Department of Insurance for the state of New York. September 10th, 2001, I'd been to the airport JFK with my boss, Neil Levin. There was a TWA building that is a engineering feat in the design. It was so unique. We were talking about the redesign and making it a conference center. We did those interviews. He gave me a ride back into the city. They dropped me off. And my last discussion with Neil Levin was, I don't know if I should go to the gym or just chill. He said, go to the gym. Those were my last words to Neil Levin. It was election day. I remember the sky was the bluest I had ever seen it. Going to work, I was supposed to have a meeting with Neil Levin at 8:30. So I'm sitting at my desk, getting ready for the meeting, and all of a sudden, the building lunges forward about 10 feet. And then it comes back into place. I'm looking up outside the window. I saw shards of glass, but mostly paper everywhere. Someone for emergency management had called me, and they said, we thought a small plane had veered off course. I tried to call my boss, but I couldn't reach him. I talked to his wife, who said, he has a meeting at Windows of the World. I called both governors' offices to say, something is not right. I'm seeing this happen, but I don't have any information at this time. I send my staff to the Marriott. The Marriott is where they set up during the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. That was going to be the command center for us and communications hub. So I said, get some pencils, get some pens, set up a lot of phone lines. Meanwhile, I'm texting through this BlackBerry the senior staff to say that we're setting up communication at the Marriott, so get to the Marriott. Somebody had come to my office, a security guard, said, hey, your life is in danger. I said, well, give me a few minutes, let me go turn off my computer. So I walked the floor with the security guard. I had a person who was physically challenged. She had a wheelchair, but she had gotten into the stairwell. Some guys had lifted her and carried her all the way down. There was no one else on the floor. So I go down into the stairwell. I'm texting the people ahead of me that I'd sent prior. I said, okay, where are you? I'm in the stairwell. They were only 10 floors ahead of me, which I thought was odd. But meanwhile, because of the 1993 bombing, there were certain changes that were made. One of the changes they made was to have glow-in-the-dark tape on the floor in the stairwell, on the steps. So all you had to do was just stay on that, on the tape. So it was very calm because we had had so many drills. It worked like clockwork. Nobody was panicking. We were just waiting for our turn to get down. We still didn't know what was going on. Because it was so calm, the assumption was, okay, you got 68, actually a total of 88 floors to evacuate, so it's going to take time. That was it. I'm going a little bit further down, I think to the 40th floor, and then I see my colleague, Patty Clark from aviation. We're chatting, walking along, and all of a sudden, someone sends me a story from AP saying the terrorists had attacked the World Trade Center. I looked at my colleague and I said, I'm going to show you something, but don't react. We don't want to set off panic. So she looked at it, I looked at her, she looked at me, and we're both saying, let's get this line moving. We continued to go down. Around the 6th floor, it had been so powerful, our building had twisted. So we weren't able to go down any further. The door wouldn't open because the building had twisted. All of a sudden, these gigantic pipes in the stairwell burst. There was water for the chillers, for the air conditioning for the building. At that point, I was thrown down into the platform in the stairway, as were a few colleagues. There was frankly no way to get out. And that was my moment thinking this is it. Interesting, I was calm. They say you never know how you're going to react to a situation until you're in that situation. And so I just kind of sat there. I was bruised after the fact, but I was just trying to figure out, is there any way out, or is this it? So I just kind of sat there quietly. Everyone else I was with, they were all quiet too. It's not like there was time to ponder your fate. I thought we were trapped at that point and there was no way out. You just thought, we're powerless to get out of the building. This is it. And then all of a sudden, Port Authority police officer David Lim pops up and says to us, hey, come up, come up. Now, the Port Authority police officers knew the buildings in and out. At the same time, last thing we wanted to do was go up since the tower was burning from the top. But there was absolutely no choice. So we went up with David. He took us around to another stairwell, but we're climbing over desks. There's hot wire. There's computers on the ground. And so we climb through all of that and we get to another stairwell. And the water's rushing through that stairwell as well. So they told us to grab the belt buckle of the person in front of us. And they were letting people go down through the stairwell, but there was a door. You had to get into the door. And the water was so powerful, it was coming at such a fast speed, they were only letting 2 people go through the door at a time. So when it was my time and Patty's time, we go through this door, and then we think we're out of the building. It was as if there was fresh fallen snow. Everything was white. The ceiling, the walls, and the ground. We were in sort of a state of disbelief. What is this? And why is there what looks like snow? I never really pondered the destruction. Obviously, it was there, but my mind was in high gear trying to anticipate what else we'd need. But that was kind of defied everything we could anticipate. There was nothing that was certain at that point. So I was just focused on walking around the side of the building and getting my feet back to ground level. Patty and I, for a moment, she started to scream, and I said, don't scream, because there's still stuff coming down. I said, let's look for footprints. So we looked for footprints, there were no footprints. I said, okay, now is the time to scream. So after screaming a few moments, we see this light. We saw this light, and a guy on a bullhorn said, if you can hear me, follow the light. So we followed the light. It took us to the side of the building. There was an overhang, and it was nothing like I had ever seen. It looked like bombed out Beirut. They told us to walk around the sides of the overhang because there was still debris falling down. And so we're walking around the buildings, and the way out from the plaza was through these steps. So we're walking down the steps at the corner of Vesey and Church Street. We get to the ground, we take a breath, and all of a sudden the police officer says, "Run." So after being stuck in that stairwell for 40 plus minutes, the last thing we wanted to do was run, especially my pumps, my dress, that sort of thing. And I turned around and I looked at this black plume, and then I ran 16 blocks to the Holland Tunnel. I think that's the fastest I ran my entire life. Frankly, when we got to the Holland Tunnel, right before it, we dove under cars because the plume was so thick. A couple of the businesses in the area gave us bottled water to drink and to also put on our head from, all the soot and stuff to help us try to get that out. I texted my staff. I said, we're going to go to New Jersey. We're going to go to our police offices, meet there. So we get there, and I said, where's Fred Marone? Fred Marone was the superintendent of police. Nobody heard anything. I said, what about Neil Levin, the executive director? Nothing. So the chief operating officer comes in with soot all over him. And then I realized at that moment, I nearly killed all the senior officers at the Port Authority because I had sent them to the Marriott, and the Marriott had collapsed on them. Luckily, no one was hurt. Our chief operating officer grabbed the flash drive that had everything that was needed, including payroll, but thank the Lord they got out. That stuck with me for a long time, that guilt of nearly killing the senior staff at the Port Authority. When the chief operating officer comes to the police headquarters, he says, Kayla, I need your help. We need to figure out who's dead and who's alive. And we decided the most sensitive way to find out who was dead and who was alive was to set up a phone number. Port Authority employees call this number to learn where to report. And then another line for families who haven't heard their loved ones, call this number. So as people would start to call in, when they were alive, we started clapping and cheering. That was what it was like. Meanwhile, we had to move to another transportation facility, a Port Authority facility, because the proximity to the police offices was right near the Holland Tunnel, and no one knew what was going to happen next. So we went to another Port Authority facility, and that's where we set up for the next 8 months. I had sent my dad a message, I think when I was around the 20th floor, saying, Dad, if you get this, I'm okay. Not thinking the building necessarily would be coming down at that point. So right after I sent my dad that page saying, I'm okay, here comes the building down. And he's thinking, well, if I was on the 20th floor, I probably didn't make it. And so I didn't get to reach my family until about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then my nieces were in grade school, and I just wanted them to know that I was okay. I tried to keep a brave face, but then I just broke down crying with them. And then I went back to work. I stayed there till I guess around 1 o'clock in the morning with our chief operating officer, just trying to anticipate what we needed. And so I took the PATH train back to New York. The train was just silent, and I'm sobbing on the train because I'm seeing all these photos of people. And so I get out of the train, I call a cab, and then the cab comes. And then I got home. I went upstairs, and one of the things that made it scary was this smell, this soot that was all over Manhattan. You could, the smell of death. The city was silent, and so all we had was this eerie dust and not knowing what was going to happen next and how long we'd be with this. I guess it was the uncertainty that fed the fear the not knowing, just trying to figure out everything. I was alone, and frankly, I was too scared to even lay in my bed. I was too afraid to sleep in my bed. I still don't understand why that was. So I slept on the sofa, and I also had a dream about my boss, Neil Levin, getting out of there. On my answering machine, I had all kind of people calling, not just relatives, people I hadn't even met from New York and New Jersey. I don't know if they had databases. They were checking to see if I was alive or not. I didn't return any of those calls at night. I didn't take a day off for several months because I wanted to show some strength so they wouldn't see me crying or anything like that. I think it was a good distraction for me. That's why I didn't deal with emotions or anything. It was just the next step, because if I let the emotions get to me, I'm not sure how well I would have performed, to be honest with you. I just didn't know. So that's why I kept my eye on the prize, so to speak. Because the antenna from the World Trade Center was down, I couldn't get any news, so I'm sitting in a hotel alone, and I don't know what's happening. So I didn't sleep for several days. I just kept running on adrenaline. To this day, I don't know how I kept doing that. I guess I kept everything in. And then I think by the third day, I think some of the leaders around could see that I was holding on to the work and I really hadn't spoke to anybody. So they sent the Port Authority rabbi to talk to me. And I said, why are you sending the rabbi? I'm a Catholic. And so we sat down and talked. That was very assuring. I think I got a hug. That was the first hug I got. That lifted me tremendously, mentally and physically. So we went from rescue, holding out hope every day, that miraculously a bunch of people would be pulled out. At the same time, all over downtown Manhattan, there were pictures of loved ones everywhere, in the trains, on the fences, in the walls, in the front of people's businesses. I think it was difficult for the country to wrap their brains around everything getting vaporized. There was this hope that maybe a bunch of individuals had made their way to the hospitals or had been brought to the hospitals. So we're trying to figure out who's coming in, who's not there, trying to get your legs underneath you. I found out a few days later that Neil Levin had been on Windows of the World with a few people, and that when, I guess, the tower was hit, the head of our police department, the whole leadership, 12 of them, were at some kind of conference together. And so they attempted to go up to help my boss get out. But we found out, after the dust settled, so to speak, that it was too hot. The fuel was too much at that point for them. It was just too hot. All of my staff, thankfully, they were okay. It was mostly police officers, 33 of them, and then 34 civilians. I think I attended 33 funerals. And then came, shortly after, the 9/11 Commission hearings, which were very difficult to deal with because you had families grieving, wanting to place the blame on someone. I remember a woman who had a big poster of her son. We're in the middle of the hearing. She points a finger and says, Port Authority, you killed my son. You killed my son. You try to understand the grief that person's going through, but it's like a sucker punch. It was hard to absorb that. And, that survivor's guilt. Going into the 9/11 Commission hearings, we're talking about building safety. Who could have ever anticipated that evil people would sit there and plan for months and months and months how to use an airplane, a commercial airliner, as a tool to kill people? Actually, a day after September 11th, I got a call from a reporter. He said, I understand there's some minutes from years ago talking about what could have happened if a plane rammed into a building. And this reporter was getting a little nasty. And I've never done this before. I told him to fuck off, and I hung up the phone. So even he couldn't wrap his brain around the fact that everything was gone. But there you are, you had families at the hearing still grieving and holding the pictures up of their loved ones and saying, Port Authority, you killed my son, you killed my daughter, you killed my husband, you killed my wife. Part of me wanted to cry. The head of our World Trade Center department had to testify. And we lost 72 loved ones, so it was just hard to accept that. We knew they were grieving, and I think that's why we as a Port Authority, and I'm speaking for myself now, we kind of minimized our own pain because we should be lucky to be alive. And that's why a lot of us kept it in for so many years. I was sad for the grieving family members, but part of me was angry. I wanted to say, hey, we lost people too, people we work with every single day. We feel the same pain. So part of me wanted to do that, but it just wasn't appropriate for the time. And so this is what we all did. We just pushed everything down. But going from the rescue to recovery and then to the 9/11 Commission hearings, we just kept going and kept going and kept going. Someone recently asked me, hey, why didn't you get help sooner? And I said, because we were too fucking busy. That's why. Other family members would say to me, hey, you're lucky to be alive. You're lucky to be alive. So many survivors just sucked it up because we felt that the families who had lost loved ones and the first responders, we thought appropriately they had to be the priorities. But many of us who just went to work that day weren't uniformed. A lot of those folks are still in the shadows. We don't know who they are, nameless faces, but are dealing with hell. No treatment, or they're not diagnosed. They've got PTSD. Many of them are drugging, are drinking. We just kept going and going and going. My parents kept trying to see me, and I said, no, I gotta work. So I think it was like 3 months into it, my parents had come and visited me one night at the hotel. But seeing the impact on them, that had a big effect on me too, because here I am numb to all this, but I didn't allow myself to let my emotions out because I could see that they were distraught beyond words. And then we went to the rebuilding.